Okay. Anyway, we're waiting for more people to get here. It's 6 after 5. So okay. So for the people in there, out in the virtual world, hey, since there's not many people here, do you want to come up here? We can't get this thing to go on the screen, but since there's not many people here, I'll share it with you while I'm sharing it with the people in there. Okay. Come on up. We have a look at the computer.
Want us to stand there?
Yeah, come on up. We'll just look at, because we can't get this thing to project onto here, so we're not going to do it. But since you're here early, we can all look at it together. There's enough people that we can stand around the machine and get a good look at it. So come on this side. I'm very outspoken too. Yeah,
Someone has to do it.
someone's got to do it. Okay, so this is basically dates back to 1991, and it's not particularly with cult members, because at that point I didn't know that the children in my cult had been abused. But this is from the juvenile sex offender ward at the juvenile what they call it, reform school. They've changed the name since then. They don't use reform school anymore. But I did, I was the art teacher, and it was like one of those programs. Come on up here. No one's here yet, so we're just looking at the thing on the computer that we can't get to go up on the screen. So I was the art teacher, and I would get a group of kids, and I worked with maybe 30 kids over the course of a year, but usually we just had like 5 or 6 kids in the class. So we'd sit around a table and I would pass out art materials, and then we would do drawings. So this is like a life story drawing where he's got all the hurdles that he's overcome, listed all the stages of his life, and here's another one like that. This one, this boy, the first thing he drew was a rose that had been cut, and it was like dripping tears or blood or water. And then at the end, he did that drawing of the little sunrise. The sun's coming up. This boy, okay, this was his first drawing. It was a battleship with blood in the water and lightning and dark clouds, and he was very proud of himself. And this was his last drawing.
Oh, what a difference.
Interesting.
And then he also, he wanted a notebook so he could draw on his own. And he did these, I guess this has to be, he did dozens and dozens of these drawings of shattered images. And I don't know what it did for him, but he really got into it. And he gave me back these notebooks just filled with these images. I think it helped him. This is another one, my good side and my bad side. A couple of those. This one says, don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, I haven't killed anyone yet. Yeah, these kids were bad too. This is how one of them envisions his future in jail. Juveniles.
Juveniles, okay.
They were between 14 and 17. Here's one that they were all abuse victims and abusers of other children. So this, I felt this was a really telling image. Although
Sexual and otherwise? Sexual abusers and
either
otherwise?
they also abused other children.
Right.
Yeah.
They had been.
They had been abused, and then they abused other children, and then they ended up in the juvenile hall. So the staff didn't like me to they never allow the kids to draw guns or knives or skulls or anything like that, but I did. So I was a little bit at odds with the staff. Here's a picture of a gun. So he had to label it a gun because it didn't exactly look like a gun. There's another one, and the caption says, "Guy shot in half." So I think he was describing something that he had seen. This one said, "This is how he imagined he would die in a firefight with police." And I noticed how the policeman was sort of facing away. His body is facing away. So I just thought maybe that he drew it. So here's one of was my youngest kid. And he drew a picture of stabbing the staff. He said, killing the staff with a knife. And then when he drew it, he just crumpled it out. And I
could see the crumple.
yeah, I pulled it out and I flattened it. I said, this is a very nice drawing. It's very nice. I like it. So you can see that's also, suggestive of what's going on with him. Here's another guy. This is a gang fight that he witnessed.
What are the ages between?
14 to 17. That was his father hitting him. And I had a lot more, but they didn't scan as well. So I just mostly picked the ones that could be easily, understood visually. So anyway, and because I was using this thing for my master's thesis, I went and read all their files, and these were some stuff. But it was fun doing the artwork with them.
Both genders?
All boys. This kid's mother, usually you don't meet the parents because they're not involved, but this kid's parents came in one day and they go, well, we have so much hope for him now. We really thought he was going to grow up and kill someone and end up in jail the rest of his life, but now we think he's changed a little.
Wow.
So that was
What an affirmation.
Yeah, it was very affirmative. Well, while I've got everyone standing up, let's look at the art materials I brought. Here are people in the internet world. Yep. Okay. So, while you're doing that, okay, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gestalt art experience, which is this form of art therapy that we're going to look at today. This is Janie Ryan, the Gestalt art experience. She was an acolyte of Fritz Perls. She studied with him. And then she branched off on her own, and she was the one who began to incorporate art into Gestalt therapy. And this is her book on how to do it. And she's gone now, but she was my teacher. And when I worked with the juvenile delinquents, I used this. Like the difference between art therapy and Gestalt art therapy. Art therapy originally came from a Freudian model because Freud was into the subconscious. And he believed that art images and dreams and myth and all those things, all those kind of symbols played a part in the psyche. And he was the first one in the West to think that. Like, I'm sure there were Buddhists and other people that were all about that stuff. But so the first people using art therapy did it in a Freudian model. And so because Freud was always looking for phallic symbols, because he believed that the basis of our psyche was that we all had repressed sexual urges, and that was the basis of all mental disturbances. And the neo-Freudians have kind of modified that now. So Freud had a lot of good things, but that was one thing that he kind of got wrong. And Jung tried to straighten him out, and Freud just rejected him, and they became enemies. Or not on Jung's part, but Freud never spoke to Jung again. Never even acknowledged him again, and it sent Jung into a depression. But I don't want to talk about Jung too much because that triggers some people because there's cults based on his teaching. Anyway, back to Gestalt. So Janie Ryan said that the art is a chance to get out of your head and be yourself. And it's like a bridge between your inner experience and what you can verbalize about it. Because sometimes you experience emotions and you don't know exactly how to talk about it. It's just, well, I just have these emotions and they're confusing and I'm worried or I'm sad or I'm happy or whatever, but they can't really understand the emotion. So the purpose of art is to be able to bridge what you're feeling into something you can verbalize. And the artwork the mind works more like art, like images come up, feelings come up, and they don't come out in paragraphs or sentences. They come out in feelings and images. So she sees the art as more like a journey of self-discovery where you you don't even have to interpret it. Like the Freudians always wanted to interpret people's art. Like, well, from this picture, I can tell that you definitely have feelings about your mother, or, you know, they'd make up something. But in Gestalt art therapy, it's just about the experience of doing it, of doing the art. And the realizations are within the person doing the art, not within a teacher or a counselor who's going to tell you what it means. So when you sit down to do an art therapy, a Gestalt art experience, don't expect anything to happen. Don't try to solve a problem. Don't think of problems to solve. Don't try to overanalyze it. It's more like just a creative experience where you just have fun doing it. And it's like a game. She said, are we all going to act like kids and just cut out pictures and make pictures? And it's like, yes, that's what we're going to do. And it's good because usually children are naturally creative, and all of us are, unless it's been suppressed at some point. So I guess I'll go into the other part of my presentation, which is to talk about the painful secrets that people carry out of cults with them. Okay, so like Roseanne was saying earlier, no one purposely joins a cult. When you join a group, you think you're joining something that will be very positive for you, and you don't understand, you know, the level of the people that you're getting in with or what they're capable of, and then you end up getting disappointed or abused and betrayed. And so people walk out after having a bad experience usually. And so this, so we're just exploring how art can help to heal from that. It can be a step in the healing. But the types of abuse that happen within closed groups is that it may include physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, financial, and spiritual abuse. Financial abuse meaning you move in and they want all your worldly belongings, bank accounts, want you to quit your job and work for them, things like that. These kind of groups exhibit racism, misogyny, negative attitudes toward children and toward the outside world. And basically, a lot of it depends on the leader. If the leader is really incompetent, which otherwise they wouldn't be a cult leader if they were competent, so usually they're pretty bad at managing and they really don't know what they're doing. So that just, it causes a greater amount of dysfunction in the group. So the level of abuse in a group usually reflects the incompetence of the leadership. And you have good groups too. If you have a good leader, you know, like your, you know, anything, families, organizations, religions, there's a lot of good groups around. But because we tend to work with the dysfunctional groups, we get worried that all groups are bad. But if you have a good leader, group's going to be all right. They'll watch out for people and make sure things don't happen. So I also wanted to go into just briefly into what the differences are between people who are born and raised in a group and people who join as adults. So people who join as adults, like I did, and I'll talk about my personal experiences if we have time. So the cult if you join as an adult, they'll turn you against your friends, your family, your previous life. They want you to cut off everything about your previous life. Often they want you to quit your job and move in with them and work for them full-time as a volunteer and live in the community. Like sometimes they don't have property, so they just want you to live nearby, and nowadays they can get you through the internet, so you're like compulsively connecting with them through the internet and depending on them. And then when people leave, the cults may shun them, or they may try to harass people who leave. And anyways, they'll implant you with a lot of negative attitudes when you, like in my cult, they told you if you ever left, then you would definitely go to hell because it's worse than if you didn't know any spiritual knowledge. Like if you get the spiritual knowledge and then you leave, that's, worse than if you didn't know anything. So if you ever leave the group, you'll definitely go to hell. And besides that, you'll die penniless in the gutter with some drug addiction or an alcoholic and die of some horrible disease. So I didn't really buy into that, but they try to, get that into you. So people who are born or raised in a group, they didn't choose whether to join the group. They often, by the time they reach their teens and 20s, they'll often leave. Is it going through? Yeah. However, they can, if they try to leave, they'll lose their families because they often shun people who leave, or it may be too dangerous to go around once you've left. And the people who leave often leave with developmental deficits and abuse issues, like we were talking about earlier. And they can leave with really distorted visions of what the outside world is like, since they were never in it. And the only thing they know about it is what their leaders told them. So they may feel like that, they may not feel comfortable going out into the world. And so they'll feel trapped between the two worlds. Like they can't exist in the cult and they can't exist in the mainstream world either. And they also, may have had like really severe attachment issues, like we were talking about earlier with Roseanne. And so one thing about doing artwork or telling stories or other kinds of creative work is that the first step for survivors or for victims of abuse is to find an empathetic person to listen to their story and to empathize with it without giving a lot of feedback or following that up. Just listen. And so they'll feel validated that, yeah, what happened to you was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. We're going to help you understand what happened to you. And for perpetrators of abuse, the first step is to tell their story and get disapproval. So like, well, I was a cult leader and, we abused a few people, but I'm out of it now and I'm different now. And people will go, really? Is that right? Well, you still look, you still got a lot of the same attitudes. And so when an abuser opens up to a counselor, the best thing the counselor can do is just affirm, yes, what you did was wrong. Don't give them any slack. Just, no, that's wrong, what you did. So that's how a perpetrator begins to heal. But often they don't, they say the only reason I worked with juveniles is because there's a chance that juveniles can change. They're under 18, they have that set in their mind that I've got to get it together by 18 or as an adult I'm going to end up in prison. So with juveniles there's a chance they'll change, but they say adult pedophiles never change. And usually that's because some kind therapist told them, oh, just forgive yourself. Forgiveness is so magically healing. All those people that you caused abuse to, just forget it. Just go on with your life. And then they do, because they're sociopathic. Oh, I don't have to worry about it? Great. And then they just go on abusing because they were never held responsible. Okay, so that's that part of it. I'm going to pass out these bookmarks to you guys. These are and let you guys know. Are you okay? Yeah. Oh, come in. Okay, we're back. So, at the risk of yapping at you while you're working, I'll just tell you a little bit about my experience in my cult. How's that? When I was a senior in college. I was at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and I was feeling very unfulfilled. College was almost over, and I hadn't really learned the meaning of life or what. I took a lot of art classes and history and sociology and things that I thought would lead to truth for me, and it never did. So then I met the Hare Krishnas, and I had a friend that was kind of helping me get involved with them. He talked them into opening a center in Isla Vista and told me to go over there and meet them. And so I did. And, of course, they want you, how cults, that's all your new best friends, right? When you meet them, they're, oh, I have all these friends, So I was really happy that I met these people. And I had wanted to quit using drugs, which I had done, and they don't use drugs. And, so I just thought, well, where am I going to meet anyone who doesn't use drugs or alcohol? This is UCSB. Everyone drank beer. And I just wasn't into, I didn't want to be involved in that whole scene. So then I thought maybe I could just learn this stuff, and then I'll go out and, graduate college and go into a career and all that. But then no, if you really want to find Krishna, you have to move in the temple, surrender to a guru, live there 24/7, work for us for free, all that. So they took me down to the temple in LA. And I met this person there who was in charge of the public relations department, who was one of the original disciples, and he was a really nice man. And then later I heard that he was interested in hiring me once I graduated and that I could work for him. So I thought, oh, this is great. I've got my career. I'm going to work in public relations. I'm going to do it for Krishna. And I was a sociology major, so I thought, oh, this is really fun. It's like I'm joining a social movement, because they called it the Hare Krishna movement. And they were sure that the movement would someday, one of their gurus would be the president, and that they would, the whole world, after the Armageddon, after the, end of the world came, then everyone would want to join our group, and everyone would become a Hare Krishna, and it would be the one world religion. This is what they were pitching at the time. And they were sure there would be a war, and it would be between Pakistan and India, because Prabhupada said Pakistan and India would probably get in a war. So that was the big fear. And they had people, they bought farms in rural areas, and they had these maps that showed where the nuclear fallout would be if there was a nuclear war. And they would buy property in areas that were outside of the big nuclear fallout areas. And so they had all these properties all around the world. And then they figured they had to have a lot of guns to protect the properties, because then when all the people came rushing out of the cities, they would try to get into their properties. So they had to have lots of guns. And I used to have kind of nightmares that I had to go lock myself in the walk-in refrigerator at the temple to avoid the nuclear fallout when the war came. And, of course I was so naive, I just believed all this stuff, and that I had to stay with them because it would just be too traumatic to go out to the world of karmis and, the real world. So usually cults try to cut you off from your family. And they tried, of course, with me, and of course, my mom and people like that didn't want to come around, but my father, who was a very open-minded person who happened to live about 5 miles away from the temple, he was in West Hollywood and the temple was in West LA. He went, I got to get involved in this. And he knew that if he got involved with them, they would let him be around me. So he made friends with my boss and with my guru. And then he started doing stuff for them. He had a journalism, public relations background from college and his career. So he would, so he would come around to the temple and do stuff for them. And like one time we traveled out to New Vrindavan to help them with their PR because they were about to open their gold temple, their temple of gold that they built. So my dad and Mukunda and I hopped on a plane and flew out there, and my dad was just like trekking around with his camera, taking pictures of everything, and then Kirtanananda, the mad monk, the killer guru, the monkey on a stick and all that, killed a lot of people. was driving us around in his Jeep and showing us around. And my dad was just like, great, you know. And then later he told me when we got home, he said, you know, I could tell there was something wrong with that guy. Because at one point we were sitting in his quarters and he was sitting on a big cushion, his little, you know, temporary throne, and we were all sitting on the floor around him. And this woman came in with a little boy, and the boy came over and put flowers on the guru's feet, bowed down like this in front of the guru, and then left, and then the woman left. And my dad said that was the height of arrogance, that man could just sit there and ignore this woman and this child who came in. Like he didn't even acknowledge them. It was just like this. And so I started to see, like my dad never told me, you got to get out of that group. But toward the end, we all started to see, my husband and my dad and I, we were like a little clique. We were always hanging out together. We could see that there was something definitely wrong with the group. And so what happened, people always want to know, well, how did you get out? So basically, my dad, thank God for him, he started saying, well, you know, you do this newspaper. And we'd be like, yeah, because it was just my husband and me doing the paper. And he'd say, but you don't ever put anything real in there. It's like you're just doing a whitewash rag for this organization. You just, all it is an advertisement for the organization. So if you're, you know, what if the politics change? Then are you guys fired and they get someone new to do it? You should be doing journalism. You shouldn't just be doing this propaganda for them. So my husband and I are like, yeah, we should be doing journalism. You know, so my dad got us going like that. So he said, you should do editorials. You should interview the leaders about these issues that are going on. You know, it's in the New York Times, it's in Time magazine, and you know, why isn't it in your newspaper? People are gonna think your newspaper's phony. So we're like, okay, we'll start doing it. So I was like, you know, on the phone interviewing these leaders, and they're like, why do you want to talk about this? You know, and they started getting really worried about what we were doing. So they shut us down. So we're like, okay. So then my dad said, you know, maybe if you get an editorial policy, you know, write out how you're going to handle these situations, get everyone to agree to it, and then you could go back into print. So we thought, okay, let's do that. So we did, and they let us go back into print. So we did like another year and a half, and then they started getting nervous again, and they shut us down again. So at that point, that was when we left, because we realized there was something to it that they wanted to cover up. They did not want light shined on it. They liked things the way it was. It was perfect for them because they could do whatever they wanted and they could go on with their little crimes and their little side things that they did. And so we left. And then I wrote a book about them. So they didn't really get rid of me. They were really pretty happy about it when I left, when my husband and I left, because they didn't like what we were doing. And you know, I had told my dad, he died right after that, but I told my dad, if they let us do the paper, we'll stay. If they shut us down again, we'll leave, and I'll write a book about them. And he goes, okay, do it. So he said, I won't be around, because he was dying of cancer. He said, but you can do it. So I did. And it was really when I was doing the research for the book that I started to realize how really corrupt it was, and what level of crime they were into, because I had been in denial, right? But they had a lot of different levels of crime. It's probably one of the most criminal groups, cults out there, as far as I know, except maybe for the Manson family, you know. But they were, I think the Manson family it was a cult, but it was also a criminal enterprise. Whereas I see the Hare Krishnas as more like a cult that also had a lot of criminals in it, especially in the leadership. But they had, I just reread Monkey on a Stick because I'm going to do an interview about it next week with a TV. They're doing it's Man Option Monkey on a Stick. So I figured, you know, he's going to interview me about it. And so I figured I should reread it. And I'm rereading Monkey on a Stick. It's a book about ISKCON. and it traces all the crimes in ISKCON. And the title comes from, in India, the farmers, they have a lot of monkeys in India. So the farmers, to keep the monkeys off their crops, would kill one monkey and put it on a stake and put it out like a scarecrow in their yard, in their fields. And that the monkey on the stick was supposed to scare away all the other monkeys. So there was this one particular murder in ISKCON where they killed this man named Steve Bryant because he was a critic and he was writing a book about them. And they killed him in Los Angeles, and it was someone I knew really well. So that was one of the main murders. That was one of the big ones that got a lot of publicity. And the guru and the hitman both went to jail for it. And I think the hitman's still in jail because he was convicted of 2 murders. But there was a lot of murders. And when I was rereading Monkey on a Stick, I was going, oh, I forgot about that one. Wow, oh, there's another one. And I found like 5 more murders that I had completely forgotten about. So like, especially the group in West Virginia, they were very isolated. They were really violent, super, super violent. The guru would tell, like for the husbands, he would just say, you know, if your wife is acting out or not obeying you, just hit her. And he would say, it's just like with an animal, you just hit him. And he would, and God, and Monkey on a Stick just makes it so apparent. It was a really kind of a scary book. That's like the 3rd time I've read it, so I'm just kind of rambling on at this point. So I'm just telling about my experience in ISKCON.
I have a question.
Sure.
What was the motivation behind these murders? Like, why?
Different things. Yeah. Usually it was, they could range from anything. Like it could be, one of the murders, Charles St. Denis was murdered, and the purpose of that murder was that he had stolen a woman from another man. I guess they were still married, and he had, you know, had an affair with her, and then he was done with her. So he thought it was over. You know, nothing was going to happen. But then the man who was the other man in the situation said, you know, why don't you come out? And I've got this great cocaine. You're going to love it. Let's meet at such time. And then they killed him. And then it was just like he had disappeared for a long time. But they happened, when they solved the case of the Los Angeles murder of Steve Bryant, they also found the body, the Charles St. Denis's remains in a creek bed. Because one of the people, some of the same people were involved in it. And to do like a cop a plea with the police, they were able to lead the police to the body from the earlier murder. I think that one was in '83. And then, so other motives for murder would be like, there was a lot of drug dealing going on. And one time I was getting gas in Oregon, okay? This was in the 90s. And you know, they have to come fill your tank. And he saw this thing on my license plate that said Hare Krishna on there. It just had Sanskrit words or something. So the guy comes up to my window and he goes, been a long time since I've seen the mantra. And I go, oh, do you know about the Hare Krishnas? He goes, yeah, my best friend died in a van because he and another guy were dealing drugs and they were skimming the profits and they ended up dead in their van. So there was things like that would happen. Or, you know, when you're leading a double life, there's always that danger that someone will find out what you're doing. So there was like different kinds of devotees. There were the innocent people like me who were just looking for Krishna, and I was really naive and pretty gullible, and you know, I think it was natural for me to just be able to go into denial and just see the good part. So there were people like that, and there still are. And then there were the leaders who were sort of each one of them had a different kind of crime they were into. So the leaders just ignored each other's. It was like, I'll ignore your crimes if you ignore mine. So there was that sort of understanding at the very top of the organization that, you know, you don't have to follow society's laws because you're doing it for Krishna. Then, okay, so then there would be the people who would still believe in the guru, like I still believed in my guru up until he left, and even after he left. But then there were the other people who would come in and go, hey, guru, I know what you're doing. I know what you're up to. I've been watching you. So what kind of job are you going to give me? You know, and they would just start demanding favors. Like, you know, I want this, I want this, I want this, like blackmailing them. And so those people could get killed sometimes if they became too nosy. It was like the mafia. It was a lot like the mafia. And leaving it, you had, if you knew stuff and you left, you could be in trouble. But because I was so naive, like I was always just this little happy Hare Krishna lady, and you know, I really didn't want to know what was going on until the end. But you know, and so then I thought, I'll just write this book about him. It'll really help them understand what the problems are and how they can fix it. And I thought, if I just write this book, they'll all read it and they'll all get interested in fixing the problems and it'll all be good. And then, because at that point, when I wrote the book, anyway, that was my motive for writing it. So it's written in a really loving way. Like it's not, I didn't write the book to bash them. It's just the true stuff that happened, and it's all thoroughly documented. So I was never worried that they would come after me, you know, but I did realize after it was published, because I was still a fringy, I was still going to the temples, so that they couldn't accuse me of writing this book not knowing what's going on. Well, it's changed so much, you know, she left 10 years ago, it's changed so much. So, you know, I kept going there, but then I noticed one time, by then I was researching the children, because I'd found out about the child abuse. So I was going around the temple to meet the kids and hear their stories and stuff. And so one time I was at the temple, and it was after my book had come out, and I was in the restaurant, and I looked over, and at the back of the room there were two goons, just kind of looking at me like this, you know, standing in the corner, just staring me down. And I realized, I gotta quit going there. I can't go there. I wrote a book about them. They don't like it. So I quit going. And it's now been like 11, 20. I quit in 98, 21 years since I've been to any temple. Yay. And when we were in Dallas a couple years ago, all the Hare Krishna people were there, and they're all going, let's go down to the temple. And I was like, I'm really tired. I'm just gonna go to my room. So I've gotten out of it every time that came up. So I think if there's crime involved, it makes it more traumatic. So.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Kind of just a point of curiosity, because I was in a similar situation. Very powerful teacher who knew what was going on. Did Prabhupada know about that stuff?
I have my theories about that.
Just curious.
Sure, I'm happy to share about that because, okay, so for people who aren't familiar with it, Prabhupada was the guru of the Hare Krishna movement. And he first came here in 1965 at the request of his guru in India. And frankly, his guru's organization was no better than ISKCON. It involved a lot of prostitution, other kinds of ways to get money that weren't Orthodox Hindu, you know. And then when that guru died, the same sort of thing happened. Everyone tried to take over and claim they were the guru. And also that maybe that guru was murdered too. Because a lot of times gurus get murdered by their disciples. And so also the way Prabhupada was raised, I've probably corresponded with every single person who's ever read my book, because I've corresponded with hundreds and hundreds of people that have written to me and told, my book came out 20 years ago. So one man wrote to me and he said that he had studied Prabhupada's childhood independently, and he read Sanskrit, and he was a scholar and spent a lot of time in India. And he said that, like, the story about Prabhupada's upbringing was that his father was a cloth merchant, and that was how they made their money. He was in a wealthy family in India. And then this man said, well, it was during the time of partition when Bangladesh and Pakistan split from India. The Muslims moved up here and the Hindus stayed down here. And he said, during that time, people were interested in changing their money into precious metals. so that when they got where they were going, they would have money. It would be universal, not the currency of the country they were leaving. And he said Prabhupada's father was involved in precious metals, not just fabric. And that when you're selling precious metals to people, you're dealing with a lot of criminals, because it's a way to launder money. Like, you know, it's a form of money that you can see how criminals would be into having precious metals, especially during those times when things were chaotic. So I think Prabhupada was raised in a culture like that, where, you know, you could break the law a little, you know, we trust the people we're working with, but, you know. So I think he had a little bit of that in him, because men would come to see him with briefcases full of money. They would just walk in and open this big briefcase of money, and he'd be like, oh, Jai, thank you, thank you. You know, or they'd come in and just give him the deed to a building. We just bought you this building here. This is for you. And he never questioned, where did you get that money? So I think that it was kind of like plausible deniability. Like, he could take the money and just say something like, well, you know, if you chant Hare Krishna, it'll change your character and you'll become more pure as you get more devotional. You know, so I think Prabhupada was just terribly, terribly naive and not really equipped for dealing with, he just trusted people too much. And then when they did bad things, he really didn't want to hear about it. So, and he was a man of the Victorian era. He was born in 1894 or 96. And so he was incredibly old-fashioned. And during the Victorian era, you just really didn't talk about things. Like, if you didn't talk about it, it didn't happen. And you don't have to worry about it, as long as you don't talk about it. So I think that he was kind of that mindset. Like, well, maybe children are getting abused. Well, I told them not to do that. You know, that should do it.
You know, I've spoken to people that got in trance with him when he was in Greenwich Village bookstore, and they were kind of hippies, you know, it was that era, and they were living in the village, and the first group, you know, were kind of idealistic, and they were simply hippies wanting a better life, and it changed so much.
Mm-hmm. In the first cohort of devotees, they were basically artists and musicians from the Lower East Side. And Mukunda, my boss, actually found the 26 Second Avenue location and rented it for Prabhupada. So it had a storefront on the ground floor, and then it had a patio with apartments inside behind it. And he rented him an apartment and a storefront. And then that was where the movement started. And the first people who came to join, some of them were just genuine seekers.
They were sweet people.
Not all of them, though. Because right at the beginning, Tamal Krishna joined and Kirtanananda joined. They were among the very first people to join. And they from the way they described it, they've just come in and just started using his shower and living there. And, you know, so they were not good people. So, and then because they were among the first people that joined the heart, you know, started it. So then when Prabhupada died, they felt they should get it. And they were among the 11 gurus that he named. And those people were just, also now I found out after my book was published that a lot of the disciples thought that some of those disciples killed Prabhupada. And it would have been really easy to do. He died when he was 81, which is relatively young. You know, he could have lived longer, but a lot of people say they killed him with ground up glass and arsenic. And then other people say they could have killed him just because he had diabetes. They could have killed him just with sugar. So, but anyway, he did die, and there was never any cause of death, just that he lingered for a while and then he died. And so, and also he was telling people in Bengali, like his friends would come see him, and he'd say, they're poisoning me. And there was a lot of hints that this wasn't good, but anyway, so the main person that they accused, if Prabhupada was killed, the main person that would have been the man in charge of killing him, was died in a tragic car accident in India in 2001, where he kind of bled to death on the side of the highway waiting for an ambulance. I think that's how it happened. But anyway, it was a really awful, awful group. So,
I have a question.
sure.
You know, I missed the very beginning, but I'm very interested in art. I've used it in some life coaching and worked with some of our clients with that processing through art because it's a wonderful way to externalize, you know, painful emotions, do something creative and have some of your feelings come out. How, with your journey, how has art been a real benefit to you, and what, like, sort of what were your beginnings with it as far as your recovery?
Sure. She's asking, what were my beginnings when I got out of my cult with all that trauma? How did art help me? So as I was getting out of ISKCON, we were in West LA, which was adjacent to UCLA. We were just a few miles from there. So I started taking writing classes through their Writers Extension, UCLA Extension Writers Program. And that was where I met the teachers that ultimately taught me how to write my book, because it's written sort of like a fictional, historic fictional, I don't know what they call it, docu-fiction or something. But along with taking the writing classes, I took 2 art classes from Linda Jacobson, who was my teacher at UCLA, and she immediately like understood me, because I guess I had talked to her about what I'd been through, and she just turned my ship around. Like in ISKCON, we weren't allowed to do art unless we worked for the BBT and we were doing paintings for the books. Otherwise, that was Maya to do art. It was just not needed, doesn't help your Krishna consciousness, don't even do it. So I went for practically the whole time I was in ISKCON, never attempted, and I just blocked it out. I didn't do any art. But then at the UCLA classes, it just broke through all those years of artist block, and I was able to get back what I had before I joined. Like before I joined ISKCON, I was doing an hour of yoga a day. I was doing a lot of creative art and stuff, writing and all that stuff. But then I felt like ISKCON had sort of put like a layer of plaque on me. Like I just was completely shut off from my creative side. And I started to notice that by the time I was leaving. I guess I expressed it through doing the paper. I used to write a lot for it and do the page layouts and stuff. But so that was my first kind of ray of light, was going through the UCLA program. And then I moved to Oregon. And at that point, I started grad school and they had art classes at the college. So I took art classes there. I took art classes at Bush Barn, which was a community art program. I took art, and then I started taking the art therapy classes through Merrillhurst Extension, which is in Portland. So I'd drive up there for a weekend and do that. So I don't have a degree in art therapy, but I did my thesis on it, so I just use it for, I don't ever say I'm an art therapist. I'm not a therapist, really, I'm a researcher. But the art therapy was really valuable too, because when you do the classes, the teachers would always have art materials, and that was how we would start. And then they would lecture and you know, have people show their art if they want to. And that helped me a lot. And also by that time, because I had always done art all through college before joining ISKCON and as a child, and that was in the days when public schools had lots of art supplies, and every day you would go out there with easels and paint something to bring home. So yeah, it just came back to me. And then doing the art therapy, I was like, oh wow, you know, I can learn so much about myself. And so I've done a lot of it just on my own. I've been to art therapists too. I've done art therapy with a counselor counseling me. And then I started using it with the juvenile delinquents. So it was real helpful, important. But, you know, it was useful because when I was doing the degree, I didn't know how it would come in handy when I went back to the temple, because at that time I was still a fringy, but I was living in Oregon, so I would hardly ever get down to LA. But one time I was visiting LA and I was staying at the Pyramid House in Topanga Canyon, and the people who lived there were out of town, so they wanted me to manage the Sunday feast for them. So all the kids, the second generation, came up with the food from the LA temple. And so after the thing was over, most people had left, but we were all still sitting around talking. And I told them, well, you know, since I left the temple, I got a degree and I worked with, you know, juvenile sex offenders. And one of the boys goes, we got to ask you something. Okay, I want to be a teacher, but we were all abused in the Indian schools. And I wondered, they told me don't be a teacher because I'll abuse children. Is that true? And I went, you were what? What? And they're like, well, we were all abused in the India schools. I'm like, you were? Because I had no idea. And then I was like, because I had a master's degree in this already. I had just gotten a couple years earlier. I thought, I got to find out more about this. And then at that time was sort of when my book was coming together. So some of the kids helped me. They read some of the chapters and gave me feedback. Because I wanted to, especially the chapter on the child abuse, which so anyways, it was really helpful to have those tools, and I helped the children start their lawsuit. So that started in 2000. I met them in 94. I rented an apartment, a small studio apartment near the temple in 95. So I could go down there and stay down there longer. And, you know, I wanted to collect their stories. My publisher wanted me to do a book about them. And then they didn't want me to do a book about them. So, but still I learned a lot about them that way. And then in 2000 was when, well, 99, by 99, the organization really wasn't doing anything to help them. And they knew about the problems, they acknowledged it, and they still didn't do anything. So then the kids were finding an attorney to do their lawsuit. And so then the attorney was like, I got to talk to someone who knows if this is true or not. So we got on the phone with 2 men and myself who were higher up in the organization. And so we were on a conference call, and the attorney's going, well, these kids told me they would lock them in trash cans and make them lick up their vomit and, you know, and is that true? And we'd go, yeah. And he'd say they sexually abused some of the children, and is that true? And we go, yeah. And we just confirmed everything that the children were telling him. And then he agreed to take their case. And then it was settled in 2008 in favor of the children after going through bankruptcy court. And so it was Children of ISKCON versus ISKCON. And it was a really good, I think it was good. Some of the children wouldn't join the lawsuit because it mentioned Prabhupada as being one of the causes of abuse. And a lot of the children still didn't want to, you know, do anything to disrespect Prabhupada, so they wouldn't join the lawsuit. You know, we tried to warn Turley about that, but he's like, sorry, it has to be in there. And they named the head of the PR department, Mukunda, my boss, and the head of the TV, ISKCON TV, that made the videos in the lawsuit also. And I asked the attorney, why do those guys have to be in there? Because they didn't abuse any kids. And he said, well, because they were using the children's images in their publications and movies, so they have to be in there too. So, you know, lawsuits never go exactly how you think they're going to go, and there's always negatives about having a lawsuit. But this organization really needed a slap on their hand, more than a slap on the wrist, and they got it. And it wasn't good for them, but I think it ended up where they didn't really change, because now the children that are in the organization now, what they tell them about the first cohort of children is that they betrayed ISKCON, they tried to wreck the movement by suing it, and that nothing really happened to them. They were making it up. So the younger children don't really they don't really know that, like, if these children in the first generation, they had not spoken up, they would also be being abused. But the younger generations now, probably born in the 90s or later, didn't experience the same level of abuse that the children born in the 60s and 70s experienced. But Statistics wise, because I love statistics, the worst abuse took place between 75 and 90, 80, 85 in that era, and that probably affected about 800 to 1,000 children, and about 500 joined the lawsuit, either as claimants on the bankruptcy or as, in the class action suit. So it was a lot of people. But nowadays, now the abuse is just popping up everywhere with the Me Too movement, and like the guy that was training Olympic athletes, turns out he was abusing them, and you just hear about it. It's in everywhere, it seems like. So, unfortunately, sexual abuse of children is my deal, and I don't like knowing as much about it as I do, but it's helpful because if you are able to talk about it, less kids will get abused. It's when the stuff is kept in the dark, that's when they get away with it. Shining light on it is pretty much the only way to stop it. And like I was saying before about the Victorian era, there was rampant child abuse during the Victorian era. Children were treated like dolls, and they could sexualize their children and then never talk about it and never have to deal with it. And that was some people say, well, there's one of the authors I've read, I'm trying to think of her name. She writes in German about child abuse. Yes,
Miller, yeah.
Miller, yes. She said that the thing about Freud is when he first started out, people were coming to him and saying that their fathers abused them. And then at first he kind of went, wow, so many people have been abused by their fathers. This is weird. And he would try to treat them, usually for hysteria. That's what women had back then. And then he thought, this is way too many women being abused by their fathers. They must have this, fantasy. The Oedipus and the Electra.
Right.
They had this Electra fantasy that they wanted their fathers to abuse them. And it was in their mind that they did. So that was where Freud really screwed up, because he left the parents off the hook to get away with this. And now, and it passes down through families. So usually the abuse that goes on has been passed down generation after generation and never stopped. But the way to get people to stop abusing is to bring it out in the light of day, because no one would do it if they knew that they were going to be caught at it and called to be responsible for what they did, because it's horrible for children. Like, nobody wants to be raped. Adults don't want to be raped. Children don't even know what sex is, and they don't have any frame of reference to put it in, and it can really mess them up. Like we were talking in the earlier session about dissociative identity disorder, where that's what they used to call multiple personality disorder, where people they have to develop an alter personality that is able to react to the abuse. So when they're being abused, they go into this other personality, and then they have another personality that deals with times that are good. So,
May I ask
sure.
a question related to the art?
Oh, yeah, we have to share. I think we're running out of
I was
time.
wondering, you showed us a lot of images in the beginning, that you work with children.
Right.
And I'm just wondering how, you have seen the process of creativity being a healing force for these children. And I know it's brought certain things out to your awareness. I'm just wondering, how have you also observed the healing process of creativity being a benefit to them? I know it is.
Well,
I'd like to get your
let's talk about my cult kids, because when I was doing the research for the book I ultimately published, it's called Child of the Cult. This bookmark I passed out has a link to where I have a link to my books. I finally published Child of the Cult in 2014 after Second Generation was already, thoroughly researched. But anyway, it was a little late, but I still like the book. But I used art with my cult children. I adopted a couple. I figured I never had kids, so I should help at least 2 kids. So I had a bunch of kids come out and I had a big old house in Arizona that was empty. And so I brought a bunch of kids out there and, you know, help them get jobs and find out what it was to have a paycheck, which, you know, once you find out you can earn a paycheck, why would you go back to selling incense at the boardwalk, right? So I helped them in that way. And so we would get out the paints and do big paintings like this, and also in notebooks, and just give them a crayon and let them just go to town. And I felt, they really felt understood. Like no one could understand them, but then they would draw a picture and I would just look at it and go, wow, interesting. And then they would start telling me about it. That's what the Gestalt therapy experience is. You get them to get interested in themselves. They do the artwork and then they want to tell you about it. So I haven't scanned it just for confidentiality reasons. Like the kids in the juvenile hall, I just removed their names from it. But since I'm still in touch with the cult kids, I don't want to, you know, go splashing their artwork all over. They might not like that. Maybe, I don't know. But they react really well to it. They just love it. And I found it's really the best way to connect with kids, because like if you're in a therapy session, like you sit the kid down here and you sit down here and you're looking at them, they're not going to talk to you usually. Like, but if you put art materials in front of them, they'll just go into it and start doing art, and then they'll talk to you because there's something to talk about. They'll show you, actually, you guys have some art too now. We can share. I should have made some too. Usually with Janie Ryan, she would also make an art piece and share her piece. And she was so gentle too. Like when I worked with her, we used clay, and she liked to use clay because it's tactile and you can hold it in your hands. And so I just made a little circle out of it. But then she would go, okay, now touch your piece, hold on to it, think about what it feels like to hold it. What was it like to make it? And then when she would talk to someone about their piece, she would just say like, well, what were you thinking when you did that? Or what was your thought on that? And she said, never try to look for phallic symbols like they did in the Freudian. Just don't even do it, because if there's a phallic symbol in the painting, you'll see it. It'll be really obvious. You don't even need to bring it up. Don't even need to talk about it because it's so obviously there. And I found that too, especially with the juvenile delinquents. But, you know, and sometimes the kid will make something really ugly that they hate. And then you just look at it and go, yeah, it's pretty ugly. You know, because they're expressing things that they felt. So, or one time one of my kids made a beautiful piece and then just wrecked it. Just put more stuff on it and made it really ugly and said, oh, I wrecked it. And I'm like, you know, it doesn't matter. It's all right. So that's part of the fun of it. More cult horror stories, or do you want to share?
I took a class. I moved from LA to New Mexico. Specifically, I left the community in LA and I went to OI for a year, and then I went to Taos to like start over. And at that time, there was a woman teaching Art and Healing 1 and 2 at UNM Taos, which has this whole mind-body connection section. It did.
Nice.
She doesn't teach there anymore. She's retired now. So it was really amazing for me. And she's an artist and a potter and all that. So the class was at her studio, and we would just, I mean, you could do sand tray if you wanted to. She had 4, you know, huge bookcases full of stuff. And then she'd take a picture and then you could work off of that. So basically we had a study that we were doing that was part of 2 or 3 different books that we used, but essentially we came up with a theme, and then we went through 2 rooms of materials and got all the stuff and made whatever we wanted, and it was a whole semester of your theme. So you had to pick a theme that was going to run through, you know, that.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
And it was amazing for me because, you know, I hadn't, in Los Angeles, I couldn't get any mental health support because LA County just didn't I mean, if you were a drug addict, you could get help. But I wasn't, and so I couldn't even get anything. And then when I got to New Mexico, Mexico's great for mental health, or it was in 2001. And so I just got, I went from one, oh, here we can help you for 12 weeks, and then now we're going to pass you to this person, and you can work on that. And then,
Nice.
so I worked with her class, and it just brought out, it wasn't that it brought out stuff, but it allowed me to go in and allowed me to say, okay, I've never really had a home of my own. So home is going to be my thing for the semester. And
Nice.
I was able to explore that. And it's hard to describe it because you're just there. And then we did a presentation at the end, so you could present, so I picked a song about home and talked about, I don't even remember what I talked about. And you also had to write a paper. But she did, it was somewhat Jungian based. But that experience, I haven't been able to reproduce that anywhere with anybody else. But I am seeing someone now here in Santa Fe who's an art therapist.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, who's also like an LPCC. She kind of does the thing where she will look at it and go, sort of analyze it a little bit and try and interpret. And I don't really say anything. I just kind of go into what she says.
I think it's good doing the art. Yeah, doing the art is what's important.
Yeah.
She's talking about for the people in there, she's talking about an experience she had where she moved to New Mexico after her cult and got into programs that were art programs at the university where she was able to do a lot of artwork. And so doing the artwork is what's important. Like when you writing the stuff is what's important. It doesn't matter what other people think about it.
Yeah, I did a creative writing class also.
Nice.
And the person that I see now, one of the things that's really cool is that she has Play-Doh. I mean, she has this
Nice.
room full of stuff.
Yeah.
But I kind of, she really wants me to do art, and I kind of was like, I just need to talk about it. So I kind of said, okay, let's make a deal. I'll do art while I'm talking. So I get to talk.
Oh, good.
So the Play-Doh is really great.
Play-Doh and crayons
It's
are really
incredible because you can do all kinds of stuff while you're talking. Oh, I'm going miles an hour.
That sounds very Gestalt.
And then she takes a picture and saves it.
Oh,
We have
nice.
but it's really cool because it's also all over the place.
The way the mind
it's all
thinks.
you
know
have
how
layers and all that kind of stuff.
You know how in writing they have that clustering technique where you might write home in the middle, draw a circle, and then you have all the octopus legs coming out. So that's how the mind thinks. Like you get one thought and then another thought, and that hooks onto this other thought, and it's non-linear. We don't think in sentences. Once in a while we think in sentences, but usually it's more pictures and images and different thoughts that connect to each other. So doing a thought bubble, cluster thought web is one way to get at what's going on in your mind. And doing artwork is another nonlinear thing. And when you do the artwork, it connects you with what's going on inside so you can put it into words. Because usually that's difficult to put into words. But yeah, art is really good for that.
It was really powerful. I mean, that's why I wanted to come to this.
Nice.
Yeah, that really worked for me.
I think art could work. I think people, the public schools cut back on art, and that's a mistake, I think, a big mistake. But did you understand?
Yeah, I have a company that I literally do the art for children, family events, but for entertainment purposes.
Oh,
And it started out actually when I went into my art therapy journey and I started painting. That was like my way of reconnecting with myself. For those that were there, at the upstairs earlier, I was talking about it a little bit. But one of the things that's been like hand in hand with the art therapy is the fact that I've been able to work with children art too, and teenagers and juvenile delinquents. I've been invited to special needs children's schools. We do programs like for all kinds of different, categories of development too.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've learned through that experience is, I like what you were saying, is like just allowing the children to be creative and not interpreting or guiding or even like, yes, this is good, this is bad, that's ugly, that's pretty, but just allowing it to happen and it to be spontaneous and joyful,
Exactly.
and a pure expression,
Mhm.
So my daughter also worked in companies she learned, and it also prepared her. She was going to school during high school and college while she was working on the weekends with children in art. And she tended to be more shy and introverted too, as a child. But I started kind of like bringing her along with me, and we started working together. And she developed in her character and her personality too with the children. She developed as she went. And
That's
so
so
interesting
neat.
for me to watch that
Interesting.
because she's really good with kids. And now she's a software engineer and she works for Siemens and has her own department. And she's like works with, and she tells me sometimes, Mom, I really want to work with kids. And even though she's real successful in what she's doing, it's kind of like it
But it
brought
was a
her to
good
her
chance
center.
for you
Yeah.
too to get to know.
Oh
her
yeah,
better.
everything about it was
Yeah.
a positive, and then I started making a business out of it, and then it, was a support.
Do you still do it?
I do. I'm kind of phasing out of it, doing
Uh-huh.
other things, a lot of nonprofit stuff,
Nice.
but it really, I love it. When I don't do it for a while, I start like missing it, because
Yeah, she's describing, for the people out in the cyber world, she's describing a business that she ran doing art parties for different populations of children, interactive artwork with children. Did you ever find that they would just start telling you about
they
themselves?
just talk and they
Yeah.
spontaneously
They
start
tell you stuff.
telling me
Yeah.
things, and it
know.
opens like this dialogue.
Uh-huh. They want to, I worked,
Art's a universal language, even if they don't speak the language, it's like
they can catch on to it.
or if they had disabilities, it's like they would point colors and in some way they were doing it.
Absolutely. I worked with, just quickly, I worked with at a Boys and Girls Club for a little while, and I was the art teacher. And so kids would come over to the table where we were sitting, and I'd give them crayons or whatever. And then they'd start drawing. They'd go, my mom and dad are divorced. And you'd go, okay. And they'd go, I stay with my dad 2 days a week and with my mom. And I'm, okay. They just start telling you stuff about themselves when they do art. It's a really magical thing. I really recommend it. Because kids, they may not have someone else to talk to. But if you think back to high school, who was the favorite teacher? The art teacher and the music teacher, right? Mostly the art teacher. Because you could just go in there and be creative and they didn't judge you as long as you turned something in, right?
I'm just going to check and make sure no one submitted questions.